welcome back, everyone, to the Break and Brad podcast. I started this show because I feel as if there are breakthroughs, paradigms, ways of thinking that aren't getting the spotlight they should, or at one time maybe did and aren't getting them anymore, or even in other cultures are getting the spotlight and they aren't here. And today's guest, Dr. is it Quave?
Quave. Yes.
I say it wrong every time. She's like the Indiana Jones of medicine. And the second I knew that I wanted to start this show, she was immediately, I knew I wanted to have her on here because what she does, I was obsessed with it the second I met her. We met, how long ago was it at Emory?
Oh, a couple of years ago at the film premiere.
I feel like nowadays when people think of medical breakthroughs, I mean, with everything we see on TV, we read in the magazines, there's this impression in your head of, machines that go ding and test tubes and fluorescent lights, and everybody's trying to come up with the next engineered feat, made out of like space meteors and unicorn hairs or something like that. But we sort of forgot that Mother Nature has been running an R&D experiment for millions of years. And I feel like we listened very well until not that long ago. I mean, in the concept of time, maybe like the 40s and 50s, we were still listening really well. But as of recent, this sort of focus on high science, high engineering, how synthetic can your synthetic be? We sort of stopped listening. So I wanted to bring Cassandra in today to talk to us about her work because she's still listening. So if you could please tell us about yourself.
I'm Cassandra Quave. I'm a professor of dermatology at Emory University, where I'm also the director of the herbarium. For those of you that don't know what an herbarium is, you may be picturing tropical lush greenhouse. Actually, it is not that. It is a room full of dead plants. So I'm very good at finding plants in the wild, identifying them, collecting them, stripping their chemistry out. That goes to my lab for our drug discovery work. And then the herbarium is where we kind of keep the physical proof of those plants. I'm an ethnobotanist. So that's maybe another new word for folks. It's someone that studies the relationships between people and plants. And as you can imagine, Brad, people have been relying on plants until basically humans walk this planet. We have around, 400,000 species of plants on Earth. And what's amazing to me is we have records of humans using at least 9% of all plant life in some form of traditional medicine. Now, that's a lot of species. But when you look at what scientists have been able to actually study so far, we're still, I would estimate, under 1,000 species that we've looked at with any level of depth and rigor. So there's a huge space to explore. And this is kind of, what I'm really passionate about is digging into those untapped sources of new drugs.
Okay. So your reason, what drew you to it, is a story that I think everybody should hear.
Yeah. So, like you, I have a very personal story with antibiotic resistance. I was born with these birth defects, congenital malformations in my skeletal system. My dad was drafted to Vietnam, got exposed to a ton of Agent Orange while he was there. And I was born with this constellation of bone deformities, missing bones. And so when I was 3 years old, the doctors, recommended that the best path forward for me to be able to eventually walk would be to amputate my leg. So they, at the time, I was missing bones in that leg, and I would have faced chronic breaks of my foot. My femur was short. There were all sorts of problems. So their idea is with a prosthetic, I would be able to walk. The problem is, as can still happen, is after the surgery, I developed what's known as a nosocomial infection or a hospital-acquired infection. I got infection into the bone. I had staph in the bone. I had gangrene, lots of things you don't want to see in your 3-year-old, right? And so that, fortunately, they were able to treat this infection. It was still a drug-sensitive strain. And so ever since then, when I, as I grew older, I really got interested in science and decided, if I'm going to tackle something, why not go after what tried to kill me? And that's why I still work on staph infections today.
I have a personal connection as well, so I certainly understand that. But your story, talk about a strength of character story. I just sort of want to jump right in, Mother Nature's biggest hits.
Yeah.
Her blockbuster list. Off the top of your head, if you had to pick, 3 to 5 of her biggest drugs of all time that the whole world knows about.
Man, I'll start with morphine, right? Poppy has a bad rap because it's abused, but if you can imagine going through surgery, it is a lifeline to be able to manage that pain. If you've dealt with heart disease, we've got like digitalis,
Hmm.
right? Foxglove has been a source of heart medications. Malaria, right? We have artemisinin. The Nobel Prize a few years ago was awarded for the discovery of this medication from a plant.
What about penicillin? It's still natural to me.
It is from a fungus. Was this kind of like, plant adjacent? Sure. There's lots of things that we've discovered in nature.
How much do you think other cultures still pay attention to this versus the US? Do you see a difference?
Yeah, I think the way that we engage with natural medicine differs from country to country. If you go to a place like China, right, or Taiwan, you have this very well embedded structure of traditional medicine that kind of sits side by side with modern medicine. I had an opportunity a few years ago to go to Japan where they practice Campo medicine. So imagine visiting a board certified doctor, medical doctor, that's also trained in traditional medicine. And this is all embedded in a single hospital. Right. So in their pharmacy, they've got Western pharmaceuticals. And then they also have a room where they have teas that they brew to bring up to the patients.
I
It's just
love that.
incredible,
Yeah.
right? I think in the US, though, we don't have that kind of collaborative mindset between Western medicine and traditional medicine. We have kind of picked opposing sides, right? So you have, on one hand, a highly unregulated supplement space where you can have lots of different herbs are accessible in your health food aisles, but these aren't necessarily regulated. They're not necessarily proven to be safe and effective.
Mhm.
They're also their formulations. There are a lot of questions around how these can be integrated, and they're not intentionally integrated into healthcare plans for patients, whereas in some of these other countries, same with Ayurvedic medicine, like there's an intentional integration of the traditional with the modern. And I like to think of these as not opposing sides,
Mhm.
but rather I see modern medicine as kind of an evolution of traditional medicine along this continuum, right? It's a
I
spectrum.
love that. You just hit on a topic that's a hot button for me. And I think as sort of a regulatory guy, I want to talk about the supplement industry a tad. Also, and I'll mention it in terms of recent times, there was like a 90% boom during COVID for supplements. It was huge. And I called it almost like bro science, which is what I used to go to this super iron gym back when I was living in Los Angeles. And everybody be like, bro, you got to try the supplement. Bro, you got to try the supplement. And I felt like I kept hearing bro science, during COVID. And there wasn't a ton of science backing. I mean, it was like, take to this, to that, and there probably were some really helpful things in there. But how much data was there really to back these things?
Yeah, I mean, there was a huge boom, especially in elderberry. We have some data that's been not from my lab, but other labs have published that show elderberry has some antiviral properties against influenza. But influenza and SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID,
Mhm.
are very different beasts,
Mhm.
right? So I think there was also a misunderstanding of like, you know, action and reaction. Just because one drug works on one type of virus doesn't mean it's going to work on every other virus. You know, there are challenges in the supplement industry, as you can probably imagine. We've got issues with adulteration because there's only so much elderberry that's available in the market,
Mhm.
right? And there are other species that maybe look a little bit similar that could be included in those batches. There could be other issues where they're using artificial dyes to kind of make it look like it's elderberry, but it's not really. So there are good actors and bad actors, just like in any other industry.
Mhm.
But we have to watch it closely. The thing that I think worries me about like where we're going as a nation, 4 in 5 people use vitamins and
I
supplements.
take supplements.
I do too. I mean, like there are certain supplements that help me just with symptom management or help me just feel healthier. And
Yep.
like I like to include them in my regular routine. It's about $2 billion of the market space is from herbal supplements in it alone, besides just vitamins, like
Yeah.
just in herbs. Now, here's the catch 22. It's an unregulated industry. We do have an institute at the National Institute of Health called the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health
Mhm.
that sometimes works alongside in collaboration with the Office for Dietary Supplements. Okay. Um, this institute, NCCIH, is the only institute that's really tasked with understanding the science behind traditional medicine, right? So you've got how do herbs work? Are they safe? Can acupuncture really help with my pain? What about yoga for different types of like rheumatism? Like they're the ones that fund this kind of very specific work on the remedies that everyday people are taking all the time. They look at safety of herbs, mechanisms, what molecules are responsible, et cetera. Believe it or not, that institute is on the chopping block. It's on the elimination list under RFK's new plan to reorganize NIH. And if he's listening or anyone else is listening, just please, 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 like, we need this institute, right? This is how we can really help 4 in 5 Americans that are using these products really put some science behind them.
We just touched on the regulations when it comes to supplements. And this is where I get frustrated as a fully regulated, fully compliant drug and device manufacturer who does all of the proper things, all of the profiles, all the toxicology, all of the CMC, all of the drug master files, all the acronyms that we could have a conversation about. And I'm very happy to know that when a patient uses something that I helped create, it is safe and effective.
And it's reproducible, right? I think we deserve that in herbs as well.
I agree. So I talked in a different episode about food regulations. People seem to forget that supplements are what?
They're a food.
They're a food.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that generally recognized as safe sort of self-declaration, we promise it's safe. And if it's not, you can come punish us later. The supplements that are out there in the world right now are actually under that same umbrella, which means you and I, by the time this show finishes, could go online, go find a private labeler, literally in China from Alibaba.com, design a logo and put out, Cassandra and Brad's new whatever.
Yeah.
And that is making it onto things like Amazon.com. That is making it into stores. And it is way too easy considering people are literally ingesting.
Let me tell you this story. So I was at Natural Products Expo West this year, and I had a bit of a funding crisis in my research lab, in my academic lab. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to CEOs of some of the major leading supplement companies and say, I am looking to do more industry work. Like, let my lab give you state-of-the-art insights into, your formulations. We can help you improve upon them, make sure they're actually hitting the pharmacological targets that you want them to hit. We can chemically characterize them. And I'm not going to name names, but I'll just say that several of these CEOs told me, I don't want you to touch my supplements. You can do nothing but hurt us. And I was shocked. I was like, are you kidding? Like, this is your chance to have some of the best. I mean, I would say we are one of the best leading labs in the country, if not the world, when it comes to the study of medicinal plants. So if I were in charge of a company, I think, man, this is a great opportunity.
And I want to talk about your lab. And I will say, just as a follow-on to that, before I actually definitely want to dig into exactly what you were just saying, knowing the mechanism of action as a drug company is probably the most important piece of information I can provide, especially when I'm seeking funding. Because, yes, there are going to be drugs that forever have the maybe factor, like it may work by doing this, but at least a good hypothesis is really important. But if, this influencer is saying this makes me feel great in the morning, and it turns out there's some science that says it's total bullshit.
Or it could be doing harm, right?
Or batch-to-batch variation is super high, or maybe there's a friggin' spore in one of the batches that could hurt somebody. Bad stuff happens, and unfortunately, that's just life. So your lab takes the guesswork out of this. So tell me about it, please.
So I mentioned before, I'm an ethnobotanist. I'm really interested in understanding what botanicals people around the world use for infectious and inflammatory disease. Those are kind of my 2 areas of focus. I could work on many different areas, but I had to pick. You've got to pick an area. So we collect these plants, we authenticate them. Their identity is confirmed through the herbarium, and we basically rip out the thousands of different molecules that you find in a leaf. Believe it or not, a single leaf can have, I said, hundreds to thousands of different molecules. So now you have this complex mixture that's actually acting on a biological target, or sometimes multiple biological targets. Sometimes it's 1 molecule. Sometimes it's 5 molecules working together to get that effect. So what we do is we kind of take this puzzle and really dive into which molecules are working, how they're working, are they safe in human cells? There are a lot of things that can kill infectious diseases out there, like bleach, right? But you can't drink bleach to treat your infection. So you have to really make sure that your drugs are selective. So that's what we do. We also, as I mentioned, have looked at safety. I'll give you a good example. Not every supplement is safe for every individual. I could take a supplement of garlic extract for my cardiovascular health without problem. In fact, I eat a lot of garlic in my diet. My husband's Italian, so we're always eating garlic, right? But if I am a elder man that's on blood thinners because I'm at risk for having another stroke, having that garlic supplement could actually be extremely dangerous to my health because it will exacerbate the activity of my pharmaceutical blood thinners. So I think that there's nuance there. And this is where it's so helpful when you have your modern medical practitioners that really can speak with patients and find a way to help them integrate their choices. Because like you said, like I also take supplements every day. It's like I want to know, though, that I want my doctor to know what I'm taking to ensure that I'm not having any herb-drug interactions or that what I'm taking is safe to take on a daily basis. Because, again, not all herbs are safe to take every day. Like I wouldn't take pseudoephedrine every day, but when I have COVID or really bad congestion, respiratory congestion, I take it for the period to help me get over that period, right, to symptom management. So we have to remember herbs are also medicine, and we need to treat them with the respect that medicines deserve.
I actually sometimes feel like when you go to the doctor and they say list the supplements you take, people almost hide them. Like they're embarrassed to say I take all these supplements, but they forget they have pharmacologic mechanisms of action on the body that could interact with the things that they're already on.
Yeah, 100%. Like we ran a study, an in vitro lab test tube study a couple years ago looking at cinnamon. People also take cinnamon extracts, like
I
condensed
love
things of
cinnamon,
cinnamon.
by the way.
I love cinnamon too, but a little bit too much cinnamon can actually be bad for you because they can actually interfere with what are known as cytochrome P450 enzymes, which are enzymes that your liver uses to break down different drugs in the body. So in some cases, you can activate or inhibit these enzymes, which can then influence how your body breaks down different pharmaceuticals. So, and there are clinical studies happening in, I believe, in Oregon under Mary Payne's group, looking at how this, how cinnamon engages with different patient populations. So, you know, I love herbs. I love medicinal plants. I've dedicated my life to studying them, but I think that we can't be so laissez-faire in how we integrate them into our healthcare and how we regulate them. Like, we just need to have more science behind it.
So, loaded question. Do you know the Sudafed story, why it ended up behind the counter in 2004? And this might turn into one of what I call my angry observation moments. There's this separation between the Food and Drug Administration and the FTC. So the Food and Drug Administration regulates safety for the most part, and the Federal Trade Commission regulates marketing, basically the market, make sure people aren't being deceived, deceptive claims, things like that. There's what they call a liaison relationship when it comes to supplements between the FTC and the FDA. So the FTC will regulate the claims, make sure that they are qualified health claims, make sure that there is proper data backing them. But until there's a problem, the other guys don't get called in. So we had remember like the hydroxy cuts and the Xenadrines and the weight loss, craze because Ma Wong as a plant was being put in these supplements. And I think it was just falling into the agricultural, I don't want to call it the agricultural just import plan because it's a plant. And because it has a pharmacologic mechanism of action like Sudafed, which, yes, was great. I had COVID a few weeks ago. Thank you, Sudafed, by the way. Yeah, for helping me to be able to breathe. It also can do things like cause heart palpitations.
It's a vasoconstrictor, right? You're interfering with how your vasculature.
Your pulse can start to race if you take too much. And when you've got a bunch of kids working out too much, popping things like 5-hour energies and taking Sudafed, basically your heart's like, it's like pushing a wall of blood against steel.
This scares me with these super concentrated caffeine supplements too now.
So the reason we now have to go get that behind the counter, which by the way, fully respect, like it should be something that is regulated, is because it took too long to realize that it could harm you. And who knows how many other things are out there in the supplement world, especially when this huge boom of supplements, that we may find out after harm instead of working with a lab like yours and actually determining whether or not it could be harmful.
And I think part of the challenge is too, I would say there are trusted sources of supplements where as a company ethos, they put a lot into validating their botanical sourcing, really making sure their batch to batch reproducibility is high. But as you mentioned, we could create a fly by night company online, market our stuff through Amazon, and a lot of people do this, and they're doing they have no idea about the movement of product. And a lot of these products are wild harvested too, and they're like, so you have some that are cultivated where you have a little bit more control, but you still have issues. Like we've had issues with like lead shot, things that like artificially elevate the weight of the final product. And remember, when you're purchasing this internationally, local growers or local wild harvesters are paid by weight that they pull together. I mean, maybe I have a unique perspective because I'm on the ground, not just in the lab, but I also go out in the field. I mean, I can tell you a story. I was in Albania in the mountains in this village where like you can't reach for 6 months out of the year because it's like completely cut off from the rest of the world. You get there by dirt roads, and when the snows are high, forget it. You're not getting in or out. And I was there in the spring with one of my students that I co-mentor he's from Kosovo and University of Pristina. And his dissertation was all about yarrow. Like a lot of our
Mhm.
listeners probably know what yarrow is, but there's a lot of different species of yarrow. It's the genus is Achillea. They are endemic, meaning species only found in certain areas of the world. So there's rich endemism, and they also happen to be threatened and like almost endangered. And so when we went through the village, it happened to be the time for yarrow harvest. And they had this mismatch of all these different species. They kind of look alike, but they're very distinct species. And so we don't know about the chemistry. Like, even if you're a related species, the chemistry of that plant may be quite different one from the other. And they're dried. You have a guy that comes around with a van. He picks it up from all the different villages. It gets brought to a central factory where it's then chopped up into pieces. And then that's sold out into Germany, into the US as a powder. But unless you've got eyes on the ground at the very start where you can actually see the full plant and how it's being harvested, this is where we get adulterants. Even if it's not, I wouldn't say the community was doing this intentionally. They don't know like that's something they shouldn't be doing.
Speaking as a drug manufacturer, so the active ingredient of a drug is usually what you see on the outside of the box. Off the top of my head, aspirin is salicylate. Would that be the active ingredient in that?
Yeah, it's based on salicylic acid, and it's acetyl salicylic
Okay,
acid.
I was just using an example, but on mine it will be polyhexanide. But then there's a bunch of other stuff in it, and the FDA, which I think is a good thing, makes us prove that we can consistently make what we say is in that bottle over and over and over and over and over again. That there's purity. You literally have to tell them where the machines are on the floor in the factory. You have to prove that the machines are being checked and validated, and cranked, and they, if you're mixing something, that it's a certain number of rotations over time. Like there is an extreme amount of care that goes into making sure every batch is the same because it's medicine.
Well, that's why I hope we have, right? That's how medicine should be.
And we don't have any of that in the supplement world.
What we do have, though, is in the botanical drug world. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
100%, which is, I was going to get into that anyway. So, but just please, good segue.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, and you, to be fair, you know a lot more about the approval pathways because I'm more of an early discovery girl. I haven't brought anything to market yet. Let's think about types of drugs from plants. So we mentioned earlier morphine. Morphine is a pure molecule, single molecule that was originally discovered in a plant. And we may even still isolate that from a plant. I think, you can either synthesize or isolate from plants based on those structures that you first discover. But it's a single component therapeutic that's then packaged for IV use or however you're going to use it. Okay. With the botanical drug pathway, it is an FDA regulated pathway to develop a pharmaceutical composition and it has some rules. So you can make a new drug from a plant that has to be from one plant, but it can contain many different molecules. The requirements are that that plant has to have a history of related use. So let me give you an example of some of the early ones that were approved. We have a drug known as crofelemer, also marketed as Folizac. It's from a tree from the Amazon. It's called Croton lecleri. It's the dragon's blood tree. So this is specifically a tree that grows in the Amazon. And locals use it. They if you cut into the tree with a knife, it leaks this kind of red resin that looks like blood, and they'll put it on their skin to heal different insect bites. But they'll also take it internally to deal with diarrhea and also internal hemorrhaging, and so postpartum, if you've got issues with bleeding disorders after. So this was developed into a drug to treat HIV related diarrhea. It was one of the first oral drugs to be approved among the botanical drug pathway. Another one, and this is always one that I think surprises people. When you think of green tea, you might think of matcha. You might think of Starbucks, but actually there is a drug made from the leaves of green tea that is used to treat anogenital warts from a single plant with multiple molecules. One of our most recent approvals was a drug made out of these triterpene-based molecules from birch trees, and it's used to treat a very difficult to manage genetic disorder called epidermolysis bullosa
Mhm.
in children to help with wound care management. So we have examples, right? And in those examples, they have to show batch to batch reproducibility. They have to show all the things that you were talking about when it comes to like manufacturing controls. You have to show that it remains bioactive, that you've got a similar mixture of the same molecules each batch. But that's a pretty heavy lift. I mean, as you know, it takes a lot to bring a drug to market, like in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I guess when it comes to supplements, all it takes is, what it costs to put it into a package and throw it on Amazon.
I love that the FDA has a botanical pathway that gives the same level of market protection. It gives the same level
Yeah.
of approval. It gives the opportunity for insurance to reimburse. It gives the company the opportunity to actually recoup their investment and even theoretically make a profit. I mean, it's a novel
Yeah.
concept. I mean, especially with investors. It's still a load of work. That drug, which I'm never going to say it right again, one search of the V.
Varigan.
Varigan. I mean, I think they took 5 to 6 years from early meetings with the FDA. I'm sure it was a 9-figure project. Their studies were 300 plus people in their phase 3s. These were legit phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, randomized, placebo-controlled, multi-centered, and they were given the same treatment as any other drug would be. And I love that, which means the patients that use it can feel comfortable knowing that it actually went through a rigorous data review. Tell me about what you do in your lab and how that relates to taking something from a plant that you discover, find, characterize while in the midst of Albania with your Indiana Jones hat on. At least that's what you are in my head, by the way. You got your Indiana Jones hat on. You take it back to your lab, and what you're doing there is really not different to what other pharma companies would be doing with synthetics. They're trying to characterize this thing that they are creating. You're trying to characterize this thing that you were essentially finding, extracting, purifying. Please talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great question. Okay, so let's start back with me in Indiana Jones hat in the wilderness somewhere. Okay. The first step is, when you're working in all these different countries, there are a lot of regulatory hoops you have to jump through. For example, we can't, if you've come back from an international flight, you can't just bring fruits and vegetables in the airport with you on the plane, right? They will say, oh no, that's not allowed. So we have international import permits from the USDA, and we're a USDA inspected quarantine facility in my lab where we keep these samples. And the reason for that is we don't want to bring something in from another country that potentially carries a pest that could escape and affect US agriculture. So, just getting to the point where we're in the lab is one big step. We also work really closely with scientists in different international contexts because we want to have ongoing relationships with these different countries. And so we do a lot of collaborative work with different universities around the world. Okay, let's say I'm coming back. I've shipped these things in with my permits. I've got my export agreements with the companies that are the countries where they're being sourced from. They arrive in the lab. We're going to freeze them. They go into a deep freeze to make sure we kill any bugs. They go through a drying process. And then, you can imagine if you're making a cup of coffee in the morning, a lot of people are used to making coffee or tea. You start with this clear solvent, water, that we heat, and then we extract the molecules from the plant material. So when you put in a bag of tea and you see that water turn from clear into a color, what you're doing is you're pulling out the chemical composition of that plant. Now, you're not going to capture all the chemicals, right? Because water is going to pull out different things. And for example, alcohol might pull out. So we look at different ways of pulling that chemistry out. The only difference in our lab is we have a lot of high-tech equipment that can then super concentrate that colored liquid into a fine dry powder. That dry powder is not a single drug or a single molecule. It's composed of thousands of different metabolites. So now we have this mixture. What do we do with it? I like to do a lot of drug discovery screens, and I kind of describe our lab as being a very horizontal lab. So, this week alone, we've been talking about neuroinflammation and using patient-derived organoids to look at can our plants help reduce inflammation in the brain? How do we do that? How can we screen with that? In the lab, we have over 800 species. We are a one-of-a-kind collection. No one else in the world has this collection because these are species that have been handpicked by me and my team and our collaborators around the world to specifically focus on herbs that people have had a long history of using for infectious and inflammatory disease. So we have this unique collection. We have these plant powders. Then we have our target, right? So you can go about screening pipelines in different ways. You can do more of a medium throughput screen, and we have a little robot. So this robot like can pipette, imagine like the size of a raindrop, right? We can run these studies in volumes the size of a single raindrop and get data from that to understand does this mixture of molecules have any effect, that a desirable effect on our target of interest. So for testing bacteria, maybe I'm asking, okay, do these molecules kill or limit the growth of the bacteria? Or do they dampen inflammation in brain cells? Or do they stop viruses from entering cells? So we can ask all of these different questions with our existing pipeline. And we've had a really high success rate from this. So we test these, and then let's say out of these, more than 3,000 extracts that we're testing, which really represents millions of unique molecules because every one of those contains thousands of molecules. Out of those millions of molecules, we say, okay, these 5 extracts look interesting. Then we go through a process known as bioassay-guided fractionation. Some people call it grind and find, which is, I think, supposed to be pejorative, but I'm like, whatever. My grind and find approach works. I have a large patent portfolio to support that. So, you basically just dive down. You take those thousands of things, you split them up into buckets of hundreds. You test them again, split them up into buckets of 20s to 10s until you get down to the molecules. And sometimes it's multiple molecules that are working either alone or together. Once we have that, we can then do more advanced studies and different types of models, really using human relevant models or, small animal models, because we have to ensure that our drugs are working the way that we hope they'll work in a whole creature based on all of our cellular based models. But you have to check and be sure that you're not going to get some bad effects. Then, of course, you get into the pathway of getting patents and spinning out companies and trying to push these forward so that you can start those human trials and get them into clinics. But that's kind of what we do.
Sounds exactly like what we do.
Yeah.
So have you seen any discoveries from grind and find, any grounds, I guess I could call that, that you think could have had major effects on diseases in the past couple of decades?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of our most exciting discoveries have been in the antimicrobial space.
Mhm.
So we talked about penicillin earlier,
Mhm.
right? And what penicillin's discovery really opened up was this idea of the magic bullet approach to treating infection. Of if you have this deadly infection, it was really a miracle cure when it came out, right? Because you could save a patient by eradicating this infection from their body. What I've learned over time is some of our discoveries haven't worked through direct killing of microbes, but instead modifying their behavior. And that seems to jive better in some ways with the ethos of many systems of traditional medicine, of the healers that I work with.
So blueprinting is a term that we use for taking something from essentially small to large. You've done your morning chemistry. You've put the tea bag into a solvent. Call it water. I don't know people that would put it in whiskey in the morning, but you said alcohol is a theoretical solvent. Maybe you get a different thing out of there. You've done your home chemistry, which I have a lot of experience with home chemistry, as I've talked about in a different episode. And you've identified that which you want to scale, that which you want, that thing that you believe could benefit patients safely, effectively, and you want to take it to a larger scale. So how do you go from the little thing that comes out of the tea bag to mass production?
Oh man, that's such a great question. So, if you watch CSI or one of these shows where you just kind of put the sample into the computer, it goes doot, 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 and it tells you exactly the structure. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. So, okay, blueprint discovery. Let's say I use all these very nuanced skills to figure out, this unique structure of these molecules. Because these molecules, by the way, are not simple. Like, they are very complex. They're kind of contorted in all kinds of weird ways. And that's because they act as like nature's key to nature's law. So once we have that, we can determine yield. It may be that in that leaf with thousands of different metabolites that our most interesting molecule is only present at less than 1% of the total yield. Right. And that happens all the time. So what do? Right. Do you go and, collect kilotons of plant material and you're grinding up, leaves and are pulling this out, kind of a brute force extraction? We do that on the small scale in the lab so we could get far enough to determine if we want to develop it or not. But it's not really tenable for long-term, production. So the other things you can do is you can work with medicinal and synthetic chemists because I now have the blueprint. I say, hey, here it is.
Mm.
This is what it looks like. Can you make this? In some cases, we've had success. Like I've worked with medicinal chemists that have been able to not only make the molecule, but also derivatize it. What I mean by derivatization is you have the core structure and then they make little tweaks to it.
Mm.
Now, the advantage when you tweak molecules is you have additional patent space around that because you make it non natural. You can also use that as a way of improving the drug's features, maybe make it more potent or less toxic, whatever your goal is with that modification path. So, synthesis is one path. Another path is, some really cool advances that are happening in what's known as plant cell culture. So, one of the leading drugs still for breast cancer is a drug called Taxol. And this comes from the yew tree. So, for any women listening that have had Taxotere, Taxol, paclitaxel, any of these that have tax in the name,
Mhm.
the story originated with this yew tree. Now, the problem is these yew trees are very slow growing. The molecules found in the bark, it was completely unsustainable to just harvest bark to make this. So, there are companies that have really elaborated the path to making this at large scale. Last resort is, you grow it. I mean, sometimes we can cultivate things and then pull them out that way or try to engineer them in such a way they produce more of the molecule. But those are the kind of different paths you can take. But again, we're not really taking those paths at the academic research level. This is more of something you want to take once you've got, what we call like a lead candidate that
Mhm.
you have a drug that you want to bring to market and you need a scale to like produce enough of it for human studies.
So I've always had what I call a patients first approach, giving the patients, I mean, access is important, efficacy is important. But I also love the idea of choice.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Given the choice between using something highly synthesized, something potentially toxic, and something that comes from nature, I have a feeling a lot of people would choose natural.
I think you're right. I think that's why the supplement industry has done so well. I think it's done so well because it offers a window into the natural, even if in the absence of, let's say, herbalism skill. And this carries over into our food system too, right? We are so used to kind of purchasing prepackaged foods, everything is kind of like from the central source. We don't grow a lot of our own food any longer. We don't grow certainly our medicines, but in other countries, that's exactly what they do, right? They're wild harvesting their foods and their medicines, or they're growing and storing them back for the rest of the year. I think we have to change that paradigm in the US. When I think about, let's talk about teas, calming teas. I have something I call Dr. Quave's calming garden blend. It is just literally like just plants I grow in my garden. Mints are a great place to start. So for any listeners that like kind of want to dip their toe into herbal medicine, let's say that you've got some issues with stomach upset, peppermint is so easy to grow and so calming at night.
Mm.
And there's just something different about growing your own peppermint, and if you don't have your own garden, that's okay, like, you can grow these in containers. You could grow them on a windowsill in a little jar, like, in your kitchen, like, or anywhere you have a little bit of light, like, they are so easy to grow. And you basically when you're ready to harvest, it's so easy. I just use some, like, twine. You can use, like, cooking twine or just, any kind of, like, twine. Strip off the bottom parts of the leaves, wrap it around the sticks, hang them up somewhere that's
Mhm.
kind of cool and dry in your house, and then a few days later when they're crunchy to the feel, I just strip them off the leaves, throw them into a mason jar, keep them in a dark cabinet. Whenever I need tea, I just pull them out. And, so easy, and such a great way to, like, be more connected to the medicine that you're taking and know where it's coming from. You know how it was grown because you grew it. Like, it's not been sprayed with pesticides.
Do you think the lack of regulation in the supplement industry, the overavailability of just sort of anything because of everybody trying to make the next product and get their influencer and their friends and their this to post on Instagram and whatnot, is toxifying how people feel about natural medicine? How how venture feels about natural medicine? Do you think that it's sort of just a free for all that is harming the real science happening behind the scenes?
Oh, yes, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I think there's a lot of marketing, woo-woo stuff around herbs. And when I tell people I study medicinal plants, I think that's where their mind just goes. It's kind of like, well, that's just not real science. I can't tell you the beginning of my career. Now I'm like fully tenured, endowed, full professor at a major like research, university in the country. Now it's like, well, oh yes, of course. People are like, well, of course what you do is like very valid and like focused on. But when I was starting out, I had to really go against the tide and say, no, there is a there. Like there is real science to be had here, and we need to apply real science here. Um, and I think it does distort public perception of what herbs are. I mean, it's there's just so much potential there.
Mm.
And that's I think what's most frustrating for me. If you look at botany programs across the country, like they almost don't exist anymore anywhere. I mean, look at herbaria. Duke University is one of the largest herbaria in the Southeast, and one of the most important ones when it comes to private collections for conservation biology.
Mhm.
And they're getting shut down because it's not a priority for funding within the university. Um, if we don't have investment into botany, we don't have investment into how to train the next generation of scientists to even identify plants,
Mhm.
right? We're really undermining our ability to mine nature for future innovations because plants aren't just sources of new medicines. You could think about them as points of inspiration for new foods that perhaps might be a bit more resilient to different factors that are coming about because of climate change, whether it's pest resistance or resistance to salinity or temperature swings. Like there's there's just so much we have to do on the infrastructure investment when it comes to the study of these things. And I think that's something I'm really passionate about. And I do a lot of science communication with my podcast with foodie
Yeah, and I
pharmacology.
want you to talk about that
Yeah.
more. Yeah.
And my newsletter, Nature's Pharmacy, because I feel like people just aren't aware. Like a lot of people have been using, or even doctors are prescribing medicines that those blueprints were originally discovered in a plant, and they have no idea that that's what they're using on a regular basis. So try to unveil like the mystery behind this, and also create a case for why we need to study more, and how do we prepare ourselves for the next medical crisis, the next COVID. How are we prepared for the next onslaught of chronic disease? We have to do more.
Are we ignoring potentially the next Taxol, the next aspirin?
Absolutely. I think we are, and I think it's to our own peril. Now, I haven't spoken much about conservation yet, but I mean, we are losing species on a regular basis. The Kew Royal Botanic Gardens in England has a report they put out every couple of years. It's called it's the report on the state of the world's plants and fungi. And it's very clear that we are seeing a rise in plants that are threatened with extinction. Some of this is because of habitat expansion, like, we're moving away from cities, like, you have urban
Mhm.
sprawl, more and more ecosystems are being destroyed. But I mean, it's even here in the US, we've got places where we once found rare or threatened plants are now a Walmart parking lot, right? So we're losing these at a scale, we're losing biodiversity to a scale that's really hard to wrap our heads around. Um, and I think as we lose these especially these, understudied species, we're really shortchanging our future generations.
So this is where I feel like there's a lack of information, but actually public sentiment would be behind this because we're seeing such a huge trend toward using natural products, toward supplements, which I do hope people spend a little bit more time researching safety and efficacy and making sure the manufacturers that they're buying from are well-known, GMP certified, good manufacturing
Yeah,
practices. Like this is one of those areas where I actually will buy from one of the big companies because I know they're more likely to get inspected. And I've been
exactly.
around for a while. Like I'm going to buy the big brand supplement because it's not just the random one that I found on Amazon. So
I do the same. I mean, it's like you wanna go with the companies that are more likely to have a more rigorous standards that aren't just doing a private
Mhm.
label, thing where they're just slapping on a label and just
Yeah.
saying that who knows what its origins are.
Public sentiment right now is very pro supplement, pro natural products. In some cases, very anti pharma. Pharma's like way down on the opinion poll. I joked about that on another episode. There's this Gallup opinion poll of like
Yeah.
25 industries. Pharma's below like politicians and lawyers. I mean, like we're real bad. But natural products have had a resurgence. And I love that. Um, And I feel like the fact that that data exists, the fact that we've seen that trend would make people listening to this that aren't aware that we're losing these resources
Yeah.
much more prone to try to conserve them. So how can they get involved in conserving them?
Oh, man, it's so hard. It's such a first thing you can do is call your local congressional
Mhm.
representatives and express to them that you feel it's incredibly important that we continue to support research on natural products, that you oppose the closure of NCCIH and this new NIH reorganization, and that you want to be a vocal supporter also of projects that entail biodiversity conservation because we have to protect our natural resources. Um, there are other ways you can get involved at the community level, and I always like to say, like, conservation starts with the community. It has to start with you making a personal connection with the species you encounter in your environment. And this sounds very hippy dippy, right? But I'm like, have you hugged a tree lately? Have you gone and
Or
like
at least hugged a tree lover
yeah,
lately. Yeah.
something like or like taking a moment to sit in the grass and look at what's growing. And I mean, unfortunately, we have, these uh mono species lawns, but like, go into a park, look at the wildflowers, like just take a moment to observe nature. I think we have to start there. Another thing you can try, and this I think is relevant not only for homeowners, but also people that want to get involved with local parks wherever you live, is there's a great initiative by this conservation biologist. He is an entomologist. He studies insects. His name is Doug Tallamy, and he has a program called it's called the National Homegrown National Park. You can Google this and find this Homegrown National Park. And what he provides to this website are resources on how you can make your yard or your park more pollinator friendly, how you can plant native species. It's a great resource for how can you make small steps at home. I think that's the best place to start because then you really see if you're observing your yard, you're going to see, oh wow, there's more butterflies. Oh, I see more caterpillars. You're going to start to see these changes, and I think that's a great place to start.
Funny you mentioned have you hugged a tree lately? Just I relocated from a city that was a concrete jungle 4 years ago out to North Georgia. And I don't think I could ever live without trees again.
Yeah. This Atlanta is like the city of trees, right? It's beautiful.
I feel like that old guy sitting on a porch, like just waiting to happen in the rocking chair, just staring at my trees. But yes, nature is something that I feel much more connected to now. And also, I've spoken about my son, the inflammatory problems he had as exposures to metals and molds, and the autism like symptoms that he has. Um, Supplements have made a huge difference for him. And these are really well vetted supplement companies
Yeah.
that came through our previous guest, Greer McGinnis, and I know she makes sure that everything is done correctly,
Yeah.
but they made a huge difference for me. So I'm not just here saying, "Hey, everybody," I'm in pharma. Like there are some synthetics that do great things
Yeah.
safely, but there are some natural things that do amazing things too.
100%. I mean, going back to the simple example of mint, like, do you need to take an acid reducing molecule, pharmaceutical if you're feeling an upset stomach at night, or can you just take a mint tea? And we cook, I think, pretty well. We cook a lot of our own meals. We do eat out every once in a while or get
Mhm.
takeout, but like, I mean, we cook a lot of things from scratch, as they say, which is actually so simple to do once you learn those skills. So I think another step forward that everyone should take is really thinking carefully about what you're putting in your body because food is medicine, but food can also be poison, right? And I think we overlook that step. And you can take, let's say, you want to take a whole slew of anti-inflammatory supplements or antioxidant boosters. If you are out at the beach, chain smoking, under the UV radiation, eating junk food all day, and drinking up booze, guess what? Your body is still going to be extremely inflamed. It doesn't matter how many, you know, blueberry power shots you take.
I'm sorry. The acai bowl you got on the way home. Yeah.
It's like you've gotta so you have to do it on both ends. You've gotta, like, really think about, "What am I putting into my body in terms of, like, inflammatory status? Am I reducing, you know, levels of sugar?" Sugar is like a Brillo pad inside your body. I mean, I'm sure you've read about this before. It's just and we have a lot of sugar in the American diet. It's just everywhere, and not just cane sugar or beet sugar. I'm talking about high fructose corn syrup. It's in our barbecue sauces, it's in our cereals, it's in everything. So thinking about, moderating that, I love sugar. I still eat ice cream and things like that. So I'm not saying be ridiculous and like so austere in your approach, but just be aware of it and think about how do these actions then tie into how you feel. I think if you can work on both ends, both with, supplements to balance things out and then better upfront choices for your body, moderate exercise, those all come together to generate an overall better state of health. Um, yeah, and I try to do all that. Like I said, with my osteoarthritis in my hip, I sound like this super old granny now, but like I have basically the hip of a 70-year-old on my right side, and this is actually what's inspired my work on my next book, which I'm calling Health Span is the working title. But it's really about like how do we not just extend longevity, which has been really popular with all the blue zone work, and I've actually done research in two of the blue zones.
Mhm.
Um, but how do we live better longer? Like, what use is it if I, through the use of a good diet, um, or even just through genetics, live until a very long age if I'm in pain and
Yeah.
suffering.
I started this show because I wanted to put spotlights on stuff like you're doing.
Mhm.
You've got a podcast, you've got a book that you're working, you've got a startup working on natural-based pharmaceutical for a disease. Tell us everything that you're doing right now and how people can learn more about it.
Amazing. I'm feeling very overcommitted like you are right now.
Boredom does not suit us,
Yeah.
apparently.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think it's also because 'cause we're so passionate about it, right? I
Mhm.
mean, okay, so what are my passions? Let's start there. My passions, my dream, and I always tell, two of my boys, my 21 and 19-year-old got tattoos, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how could you do this?" But, like, my pledge to them is when I get my first drug to market, I will get a tattoo of that blueprint on my body somewhere. I was like,
You are now on the record. Yeah.
I know, I'm now on the record, hopefully not on my forehead or somewhere else, but, like, that's how passionate I am about it. Like, I'm so passionate about the work we do, not because I'm, like, wanna get the next paper in a high-ranking scientific journal. Yes, that's important. Okay, fine. What gets me excited is, like, how can I move this discovery into a pathway that will eventually help possibly tens, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of people.
Mhm.
That is my passion. That's what drives my research goals. That's passion 1. Passion 2 is science communication. I never set out to be a science communicator. I grew up in a very rural town. I was a science fair dork. That was my other kids had sports. I did science fair. I was like growing E. coli out of hamburger meat and like studying UTIs and drug resistant E. coli in high school. I mean,
You were that girl.
I was that girl, and man, and I love science fair. Science fair was like, I mean, and I'm probably giving like trauma flashbacks to parents who've had kids with science fair projects that are late or, not.
Mm.
But for me, that was like my sport. I loved it so much. And I learned through science fair also the importance of the ability to talk about your science with everyday people. I love like being able to go home, and I'm from a little cow town in South Florida, and, going home to that town and talking to my neighbor who's a farmer about what I'm doing. Like, or to the rancher, like, "Why is what I'm doing how is that important to him?" Because, in the end of things, a lot of my work is funded through government investment in science, which is so important to continue. But I don't work for myself or the university. In the end, I work for the American people. Like, that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to make lives better. So that kind of ties together. I'm doing this work, but I'm also trying to communicate because there's a lot of noise,
Mhm.
and especially with new social media, TikTok videos and all kinds of things. I mean, it got really dangerous during COVID,
Yeah.
really dangerous. Like, people were taking really high levels of cinchona bark, which can cause a disease called synchronism because it was thought that this could somehow cure them of COVID. It doesn't, by the way. Just made people sick. We had people pitching oleander, like the My Pillow guy was somehow got on the news, oleander is the way to cure COVID. I'm like,
Mm.
no, you will actually die from this. It wasn't just like, oh, it's a supplement that you know, might you'll take and nothing will happen. No, this is something that will actually kill you because it like basically shuts down your heart. So I kind of felt this calling as someone who's an expert in medicinal plants to speak out more.
Mhm.
And so what I do today with my communication pathways, I have my book, The Plant Hunter. It was published in 2021 by Viking, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. It's available in paperback. You can find it at your local bookstore. I'm always like, go to your local bookstore. They can order it if they don't have it in stock. It's also on Amazon. It's also written in Mandarin, sold in Taiwan, and it's also in Japanese, which I thought was really cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I can't read either of those languages, but it's cool to have it in those other languages. So we have the book. We have it was, by the way, I'll just do a little self promotion here. It was rated as one of the best nonfiction books of 2021
How
by
do you
Kirkus.
self-promote?
So like it's
I want people to
yeah,
become obsessed with what you're doing so that we can
right.
help like get the word out and grow this more. No pun. That was a great pun, but also unintended.
Sport.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
So
So like check out the book. And it's not like a heavy science book. It's a story, it's a memoir. It's a story of me growing up as a disabled girl in a little rural town and becoming a scientist and all the cool things that I learned along the way from my adventures in the Amazon to my work in the Balkans and in Italy. It's got all that story. So it's hopefully I think it's a fun read. Um, I have the podcast, Foodie Pharmacology. It's been a passion project of mine working together with Rob Cohen and Christine Roth out of LA. And we're in our 7th season now. Total nerd fest. Like I just like get to like, like you do. It's like I love talking to people. I've had Nobel laureates on there, James Beard award-winning chefs, just farmers from down the road. I mean, like scientists, a whole mismatch of people that look at food and like are studying food or are producing food and getting all their perspectives, since that's kind of my food show. And then the area where I'd really love to show people to go would be my newsletter, Nature's Pharmacy. For a long time, I struggled with social media. I'm not a great short content writer. I like to talk in an episode or like to write like, short essays. So Nature's Pharmacy on Substack is how I do that best, I feel. And you can find whenever I have new episodes of the podcast, I always post it there as well. But that would be it's Nature's Pharmacy on Substack is another way to find me.
you talk about science-based communication. So your resume, I could jack my car up on, by the way. So I can tell you that as a person who had to self-teach all this science, I mean, I got a bachelor's in sociology and a master's in education. I mean, walking into rooms with the CDC talking to MD, PhDs was a bit, I'll call it intimidating at the beginning.
Yeah,
Thank you for being somebody who can make it sound like English.
that's great.
Because the number of papers that I have read where the title, it's clear, it's like you're just writing it to your friend,
Yeah.
down the hall in the same academic hall as you. Like the public can't understand it. So thank you for communicating in a way that people can understand. I like personally appreciate that.
And I feel like we do it. We just become this echo chamber. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm premenopausal now. And I'm like, I've gotten to the point in my life where I just cut through the BS. I'm like, and who cares? Like, how is this going to help human health? I mean, and that's kind of a naughty thing in science sometimes. And I'm not trying to discount basic science. Basic science is the foundation upon which we build translational science. But, you know, I am unabashedly translational in my work, and that doesn't always drive well. Like, but for me, I'm like, this is what motivates me.
Mhm.
I want to make sure what I'm doing can someday lead to the betterment of somebody's life.
Yeah.
And that's just how I operate,
All right. It's
you
a
know?
dream question. Somebody hands you $500 million tomorrow, some ungodly number,
Yeah.
and says, do whatever you want with it.
Is Jeff Bezos or Elon listening? It's like, yes. It's like
Somebody who loves plants.
someone who loves plants.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I think with that kind of investment, my dream has always been to set up an international collaborative network where we can link these hotspots of biodiversity with state of the art tools, researchers, a true multidisciplinary team. When you think about where some of the greatest hotspots, and hotspots are places where you have huge levels of unique plants that only occur in some very few parts of the world. They tend to be in countries that are economically developing, where there's almost no science infrastructure. And so there are brilliant people in the universities there, but they just don't have anything close to the resources necessary. So I would create a program that ties together strategically in these different hotspots, working with local scientists. Again, this is not an exploitation of countries' resources, but to really build up infrastructure and then have a hub where we could really propel, drug discovery research that could lead to solutions for some of our greatest challenges we face today. Challenges like autism, challenges like neurodegeneration as we age, challenges like, antibiotic resistance, cancer. Like with that kind of investment, we could not only build a really robust pipeline of new molecules to study, but we could also team up with some of the world's best experts in each of these fields to really accelerate drug discovery. That's what I would do with it.
You've got a megaphone, you've got a pulpit. The policymakers are listening. What do you want to say to them?
I mean, I think my message to policymakers is that this is the era in which US science must dominate. If we're going to stay strong in terms of being a leader in the global economy, we have to dominate this space. And we can only do that with continued sustained investment, not just in translational science, but also basic science. More close to home. I mean, I'm here, I always say the Lorax speaks for the trees, I speak for the weeds. I will say when you have 4 in 5 Americans using herbal supplements on a daily basis, and you have to have investment in a research infrastructure to ensure that what they're taking is safe, that what they're taking actually has some mechanistic understanding. I think we have to not only save the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. And it covers not just herbal or botanical supplements, it also covers interventions involving yoga, meditation, acupuncture. We want to put the real hardcore science behind which of these mechanisms can work for different types of disease outcomes. So my plea to you all is not just save this institute, but continue to fund and grow in funding because the reality is the supplement industry is not investing in R&D. They're not going to fill that hole. I mean, I've often thought about maybe putting a special tax on the supplement industry that could fund research through through the government. That's another thing I'll throw out there. I'm probably gonna get hate mail after saying that. But I mean, from the billions, $2 billion, in the market just for the botanicals, we have to like take some initiative to really support research in this space because it's what Americans should have that benefit. Like,
Yep.
we should be able to know what things are appropriate for our unique conditions, and I like the idea of having choice, and I wanna have informed choice. I think we need to do a better job also with communicating the pros and cons of different herbs, not just to consumers, but also to physicians. This is not taught in medical school. It's not really taught in pharmacy school. We need to do better. We can't just keep brushing this aside and waving it away. "Oh, just don't take those things," and patients hide what they're taking. We need to address this head on because the reality is choice is important in medical care, and we need to give people, the most informed choice that they can have. When you feel a supplement having an effect on your body, it has a pharmacological activity,
Mhm.
and dose matters. Think about, for any of you that have had coffee, a cup of coffee is great. If you drink, a whole gallon jug of coffee a day, maybe you're not feeling so great, but is that a pharmaceutical intervention? No,
Yeah.
it's a natural product. It's the
Yeah.
caffeine and the other xanthine alkaloids present in that coffee that are causing your heart palpitations and these other effects. So we have to remember plants are medicine, and we need to give them the kind of respect that we give our other medicines.
I just want to say thank you. Coming here in person is awesome. I knew the second I hung out with you on that panel, I was like, this girl's cool. She does cool stuff.
Likewise.
I want to like go and hang out in her lab all day and look through the microscopes and do the grind and discover stuff. But you've got a book, and I feel like that should be a movie, by the way. So if there's a movie producer out there listening, not
Oh
to
my
add more to you, I'm just
God. I love that. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
your story deserves a movie. Check out there's Instagram, Substacks, Foodie Pharmacology. There's all the information's on the screen. Such an honor having you here, Dr. Quave. I said it correctly.
Yes, thank you. It's been so much fun.
All right.